Why do you want your own house?
So I could just be financially dependent, pick where I want to live.
Even if you're married?
Yeah, like I would probably buy a house before pursuing dating for marriage. Yeah.
So what if, and then he would have his own house and you'd...
I guess from there we would figure it out. From there, if we wanted to sell the house or both live in the house, like I'd be fine moving a guy into my house. Yeah.
And you would still own the house, or you'd split the house with him, or you'd transfer it to him.
I wouldn't transfer it to him. It would be my house for sure.
You would have separate finances.
I don't know about that, but in terms of like where I want to live, I'm 100% picking that on my own and getting my own house.
Okay, but
so if the man comes and goes,
your bank accounts would go together, but you'd keep the house in your name.
If we're married, I guess we'd figure it out as we go. But I'd probably like date someone, and then I don't know. I just don't want to be dependent. I don't want to like.
You don't want to be
move
dependent. So right, exactly. You don't want to be dependent. So why get married?
Why get married?
Yeah, I could be independent. I could live on my own. I could hire a maid. I could hire a cook. I could just whatever, you know. I don't want to be independent. I want to be dependent on my wife. I love my wife. I want to make a vow that I'm going to stay with my wife forever and have a nice big family, and I don't want to be separated at all. I want to be one flesh with my wife. If I didn't want to do that, if I wanted to just be on my own but have someone to mitigate the loneliness and occasionally sleep with, why get married at all?
I do want to get married. I am going to eventually date to marry, I think. Like, my goal is to eventually start dating in like a year, date in under 3 months, get engaged, get married. I don't want to do the like multi-year dating and good. Like cohabitating before. I think that's a joke. I think it's a waste of time.
But why do it?
I'm also cognizant of the fact that men today are a joke, and there's a 1 in 4 chance that your husband's going to commit infidelity, and I don't believe in necessarily like pursuing
There are things you can do to mitigate those
stats,
stats, though.
Mitigating infidelity on my husband's part? What? Being a fucking glow doll for him?
No, I wouldn't recommend that either. No, the things you could do is marry men who, for instance, don't recognize the sacramental reality of divorce. Just to use one example.
That's not what I said. I said infidelity.
Or who recognize that infidelity is
every man I've ever dated has been Christian conservative, and at least one of them, I found an Oculus in his closet where he's watching VR. In my experience, like I said, at the macro level, it's usually these Christian conservatives who are the most addicted, and at a micro level, these men I'm dating.
You date a lot of these Christian conservatives. Well, there's something about them that attracts you.
Well, I'm waiting till marriage.
Good. Oh, good. So you don't... Okay. Well, look, I think that's fabulous. Mm-hmm. And I love that you as a feminist are very attracted to Christian conservative men. I think that's good for society broadly. It's bad that these guys are like looking at whatever. I don't know that necessarily implies that once they get married, they would either continue to do that or would step out on you and cheat and have an affair or whatever. It does seem to me, though, that certain groups of men are less likely than others to sleep with other women. And so, you know, if you want to have that good, stable life and maybe overcome your fears of being dependent on someone who might be a total loser, then you might want to make sure you don't pick a total loser.
But even stepping out aside, I mean, I gave you those stats about correlation between religious men and consumption and prostitution purchasing. So like, how can you say that?
Some people who are broadly religious of some sect or other do that, and all people are tempted by things. But I don't think that we can just throw our hands in the air and fall into a kind of romantic quietism and say, well, they're all just, these men are all dogs, they're all cads. No, actually some men are more inclined to virtue than others, and you know, that might, if you...
But based off the stats, it would seem the religious men are less inclined to virtue.
No,
not that's porn and buying sex.
That's ridiculous. You're telling me that
but I gave
Christian
you
men are more like... No. You gave me a stat and said, you know, certain red states with certain religious groups consume certain kinds of whatever. But
the more Christians are in a state, the more pornography consumption and searches there are in prostitution purchases, yes.
It would seem that perhaps there are other factors at play there. When you're talking about a full state, I don't know, when you're talking about class, income, when you're talking about education, when you're talking about family formation in the first place, when you're talking, for goodness sakes, when you're talking about geography, you know, we're talking about whole states here, and you're pulling one variable out and saying, see, there it is, the correlation is the causation. That's crazy. You're saying that the thing that is preventing you from wanting to be codependent on a man, actually engage in this marriage, totally giving
is
yourself
because I've become disillusioned with the state of tradcons, and I think they're a hoax.
No, you don't think it's true. You're picking on tradcons because you think that they're your ideological opponents. I don't think they are.
I don't think so. If that was the case, I wouldn't date them.
I think that if one identifies as a liberal feminist, then necessarily tradcons are your ideological foes.
I completely disagree.
But I agree that you're attracted
to similar perceptions of hookup culture and a lot of things depending on the sect of feminism I am. I actually find way more common ground with conservative men than liberal men.
That's fabulous. But you think they're not living up to it. Okay, well then, find...
I think they overcorrect. They will vouch that they don't watch porn. They're going to be like, you know what I mean? The more they talk about how disgusted they are by porn, the more likely I am to find out that it turns out that they are watching porn. Like I said, I found that at like the micro anecdotal level of my dating life, and then also at the macro level just based on statistics.
Wait, you object to your partner watching...
It wouldn't be ideal, yes.
But my understanding is you don't do any nudity in your content, but you...
Wait, you have an OnlyFans too?
Yeah, she doesn't.
What? Are you kidding me? I've been... Oh, man, I thought you strung me along so well, and now you're going to pull the rug out. Hold on. You're the one who's trying to entice these men to look at this stuff. And then you're trying to put all of the blame on them?
My OnlyFans I started a year ago. I'm talking about, this is why I became disillusioned and pink-pilled, is because I did everything right. I was a virgin all through college. I'm still a virgin. I do all these things. I date these Christian conservatives. They talk about waiting till marriage. They talk about going to church every Sunday.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah. No, look, I don't doubt that addiction is totally prevalent.
And if they're not watching... They're following Instagram models. They're going to Hooters. It's mostly conservative men. Conservative men that I'd go on dates with. They'd have these like posters of like nude playgirls and stuff like that, like Playboy bunnies and stuff. And that's usually
Are you dating like 65-year-old men? What are you talking about, Playboy?
It's more of these conservative like Midwestern boys who like have that type of paraphernalia.
Yeah,
that's
I
like
don't know.
more.
Hold on. Now, are we talking about
native to their
Are we
culture.
talking about like a pinup thing in your garage from the 40s, or are we talking about like actual fiction where people are
it doesn't matter
looking at
to
your
me
content?
It's all the same. I'm just saying that like why is going to Hooters more acceptable? Why can't I throw my chips in?
Wait, one question. So but you do make content, so I guess how do you reconcile that with objecting to your partner watching that sort of content, but you also produce that kind of content? I don't necessarily... Well, go ahead.
I mean, I just think it's funny because always on these red pill shows, men will get on here and be like, yes, I wouldn't date a porn star. So what's the issue?
And you're saying I do, but I wouldn't date a guy who watches it.
Yes, because I'll tell you why. If you actually look at pair bonding, watching does affect your neurochemistry and your pair bonding. Me being lusted after does not affect my neurochemistry or my pair bonding.
But you're enticing them to do it. Like I'm maybe the least judgmental person on the right when it comes to this stuff, because all sin and fall short of the glory of God. But you are part of the problem, and the thing that you're inveighing against is something that you are encouraging and profiting from as you encourage it.
That's only if you consider lusting to only exist within pornography. I think even if my boyfriend were lusting after like 18-year-olds, like a cashier at a grocery store, I would think that's just as wrong as
Lust
watching
is
pornography.
Bad. But and pornography
no, I'm not
encourages
enticing them.
and inflames
Same
lust.
way, even if I didn't do and I was just an attractive woman, that doesn't mean I'm enticing men by putting on makeup every day. It's up to them to not lust after.
Putting on a little bit of rouge is going to be less exciting to a man than doing...
I don't know if you've heard JP talk about it. He says women put on blush to simulate sexual orgasm in their face. And
actually,
that's also
if you want to get
sexualized.
into female cosmetic coalitions, there's a very interesting anthropological point to that very thing you've just said. But clearly there are gradations also. A 1940s pinup poster and hardcore on the internet, one is going to excite one more than the other.
Yes, and if we're talking gradations, and where I fall in those gradations is probably on the more mild side. I don't do nuded content, but
you don't do nude content? What is... I thought was
content if anyone wants to check it out.
You can post whatever you want. Cardi B just gets on there and yaps and is one of the top 10 creators. But I mean, regardless, like I said, even if I did do nude content, even if I did necessarily like touch myself on camera, that doesn't affect my neurochemistry in terms of pair bonding. But a man watching that,
men.
Yes,
you're doing something bad to these men and then complaining that the men are bad.
Well, that doesn't follow, because if I wore a bikini and went to the beach, that doesn't mean that it's my fault. Then if my boyfriend checks out women and just stares at them on the beach, like I'm not responsible
I think women
for
should be
his
more modest
inordinate
on the
amount
beach,
of
actually.
lust.
Yeah, I do think they should.
I don't think most people would subscribe to that. I don't think most people would say that if I wear a bikini on the beach, that means I'm a hypocrite. If I say I don't want my boyfriend just ogling women at the beach all the time, and I think that would make an improper partner.
You're not really complaining about men who go to the beach and maybe take a little gander down the shore. You are specifically complaining about men who look at...
No, I didn't. That's why I brought up VS Angel shows. That's why I brought up Hooters. That's why I brought up the posters.
Victoria's Secret.
Why would I bring up all these things if the threshold for me was just... That's why I walked it back and said all these other things.
Okay, you did walk it back and included these other things, which I think are totally legitimate. But, there are plenty of things that I think are bad, and plenty of sins that I fall into, like all the time, right? But I don't complain about them being bad while actively promoting them. There's no cognitive dissonance there?
No, I think it's bad if you're in a relationship and you're lying to your partner and saying, I don't watch, and you do it. And then you consume it. That doesn't mean I think...
That's also bad.
That doesn't mean I think watching is morally bad on its own. If I'm saying I don't want that, that's why reason I said I don't think necessarily dating women is bad. But if I was married to a man, then yes, I would say him dating other women is bad. Doesn't mean I'm condemning dating in general.
So you're coming back to the same thing that you said about abortion, which is I would never do it, but I'm not going to say it's wrong.
No, I think once you're in a relationship, there are certain activities that you should not do.
Because
such as dating other women. So
what if your partner says that it's okay to do that?
What do you mean? I would find someone who has moral congruence to me.
Right, but you're saying if you're in a relationship, you shouldn't date other women. But what if, not you, but some guy were dating some girl, and dating you? You really? Oh no. And you would say, okay, it's fine if you date other women. Would you say that's then you would say in that relationship it is fine to sleep with other women, or no?
Like, are you asking me? Do I have objective moral guidelines for what dating should look like?
Yeah.
I think if your goal is to have the most optimal marriage, there's lots of things you should not do, such as I think you should have a low body count if you want to optimize, longevity of marriage. I don't think you should watch. At the same time, I don't like that it stops at just those two things. Like, I think those are just the two things we use to shame women and try to force them into modesty. But there's other things. For instance, like, you shouldn't even cohabitate with your boyfriend before marriage, even if you're not sleeping together. If you technically want to increase your chances of longevity.
Why not?
And even once
why shouldn't you cohabitate?
It's not about shouldn't. I'm saying it more.
Why would you discourage cohabitating?
It's not about discouraging. That's why I'm saying I'm not moralizing it.
Whatever you just said about cohabitating, why are you saying?
If your aim is to have the longest, most healthiest, most happiest marriage possible, statistically speaking, not having previous sexual partners, not living together before marriage will optimize those things. That doesn't mean I'm moralizing it. Same way again, if you're
married.
Why
with cohabitating? Because it's an important point on what we were just talking about.
You desensitize, you kind of shore up on wifely duties before actually getting wifed. It gives the guy this incentive where he doesn't have to, buy the cow because he's getting the milk for free, all that bullshit. But that actually pans out statistically. But my point is, we talk...
And because it's enticing, right? Because it's tempting. You're not going to cohabitate and not sleep together.
That's not true.
You think you could cohabitate and not sleep together?
I've done it, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Was the man a homosexual?
Are you saying he's going to transgress my barriers if I'm like, don't fuck me?
No, I think he would find it. I think he would move out before he would deal with that. Regardless,
I'm just saying there are certain things that will optimize your marriage. For instance, even once you're married, if you guys don't sleep in the same bed, that will actually lead to a stronger marriage. That doesn't mean I necessarily prescribe it. It just depends. What are these variables that you want to add into your relationship to strengthen it? So it's not necessarily that I would say a guy shouldn't necessarily watch his girlfriend's okay with it. Same way, again, technically I wouldn't prescribe don't sleep in the same bed together, even though that could also disaffect your marriage.
You've come to so many of the right moral conclusions, but you just don't want to take credit for them. You don't want to say that they're true. You just want to say that you just accidentally come to the right conclusions.
Let me ask you this. You probably prescribe that people don't have premarital sex, right?
Yeah, I would.
Were you a virgin
until
marriage?
No, I was an atheist for 10 years. I did a lot of naughty things.
Okay, and you would probably prescribe that people don't watch pornography in marriage.
Yes.
And the reason being that would disaffect your chances of marital success and happiness.
No, I don't. As we were talking about earlier on ethics, I don't view ethics from the perspective of consequences.
But you also said what's true is typically what's good, so they're kind of hand in hand. That's what you said earlier.
Right, but I don't consider means in light of ends. I don't think that good ends would justify immoral means. What I'm saying is that actions are good or bad depending on the actions, and more importantly, actually, on the character of virtue of the person who is acting in them. So the way that I would ascertain what's good or bad is according to virtue, not according to some weird calculation of like statistics say I'm going to be married longer or whatever.
Well, final thought from the both of you on this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, statistically speaking, couples are happier together when they don't sleep in the same bed. Would you not prescribe that then, because there's no virtue tied to it? That's more. No,
there's a lot of virtue tied to modesty and restraint and waiting until marriage.
No, that's not what I meant. Even once you're married, you'll have a more successful marriage, statistically speaking, if you don't sleep in the same bed as your partner.
That's very aristocratic. I'm too middle class to do that, but. But yeah, the aristocratic classes sleep in different beds.
I guess my point was that people pick and choose what level of pair bonding they want to create with their partner, whether it's not watching pornography, having premarital sex, and then not sleeping in the same bed.
I'm skeptical that you actually have more marital satisfaction if you don't sleep in the same bed. But the British royals have been doing it for a long time, and they all cheat on each other, I guess. So maybe,
right. I guess what I was trying to outline is just that there's a lot of different
I am going to have to move on. We have C. So I think when it comes to feminism, something that a lot of feminists fight for is abortion rights for women. So I think I'd like to touch on that for a little bit. So a good jumping off point for each of you, what is each of your basic stance on abortion? We'll have you guys go first, then we'll have Michael respond. And starting with you, Farah, go ahead.
On a personal level, I'm pro-life. I wouldn't get an abortion, but on a macro level, I'm pro-choice.
Okay.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings and thoughts when it comes to abortion. I am generally speaking pro-choice. Do I think abortion at any stage is moral? No, not necessarily. However, I do have strong reservations about the government being able to dictate when exactly, or like just deciding like, oh, like let's not have any pro-choice, pro-life all the way. I have like very strong reservations of the government being able to dictate a law to that nature. So I have a mixed bag right now.
Jasmine.
Yeah, I think abortion is one of the hardest moral issues. Like, it's so unique, and I think anyone who thinks it's so easy on the other side just hasn't delved into this topic enough, because there's really good arguments for both sides. I typically hold like, what the question is, when is that fetus or whatever you're going to call it, depending on the stage, a person? And I think the strongest argument for me is the consciousness one. So when, to me, having a baby like that's alive and something in a petri dish, like, I don't see those two things as exactly the same, but I do think there are really good arguments about it. It's just a really hard topic.
Why would you not have an abortion for your own child, but you would permit it or even maybe recommend it for others?
Same reason I've been vegetarian my whole life, but I don't force it onto others. Like, I have my own personal visceral reaction to certain types of behavior, such as, you know, hunting, factory farming, and even possibly abortion, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm deducing some sort of like moral imperative from that.
Well, I should hope if you care about a bunny rabbit and, you know, you won't eat a hamburger, then certainly you would care about a human being. And it seems like that's the logical connection, sure. But doesn't that then seem to be like saying, look, I would never murder my precious baby, but all you often poor black people, you can kill your babies, that's just fine.
No, because I never said I do it because I view it as murder. I said it's more of a visceral reaction.
So it's unreasonable. You just think it's yucky.
Yes. I found it yucky when you opened the doll's mouth and put a cigar in it, but I don't think that's wrong to do.
I find this disgusting.
It grossed me out when I was going to ask you to remove it.
Michael's
depraved. That was not my idea.
He was very excited to do
it. I did think it was very funny, but it was not my idea. Look, I love what you just said. It was what a beautifully honest thing you admitted. You said, I find abortion to be wrong. And
I didn't say wrong.
For you. Wrong for you.
When we say wrong, we're usually moralizing it. I just said I found it gross, and I had to look away when you opened the sex doll's mouth. That doesn't mean I think it was wrong
it's
to do that.
abortion boo for her.
Yes, you're saying I find abortion repulsive, and therefore I wouldn't do it, even though I can't reason as to why I
The process
wouldn't
grosses
do it.
me out. I find it gross to use a tampon. I don't use one. I don't think
sure.
people shouldn't use
I'm
it.
with you.
I personally don't want to do it. I find it invasive. I find the process of,
Totally.
you know what I mean? Certain things to be invasive, but that doesn't mean I'm going to prescribe it for everyone or even moralize it.
What you've just articulated is something called the wisdom of repugnance, which is an idea that was elaborated on by the bioethicist Leon Kass. About 20 years ago, he had a famous book on this. We don't write a moral treatise on every single thing. I get out of bed, should I have eggs or pancakes? So I don't know, let me write a 10-page essay. No, you just go on your prejudices a lot of the time. And I know prejudice is a really nasty word these days, but most prejudices are right. You know, it's just, you can't...
But sometimes they're wrong, like slavery.
Racism,
but there were also plenty of people who recognized the moral...
But that argument doesn't pan out, because you just said I
should
should deduce some sort of correctness and morality from my prejudice. But if I just said I enjoy getting abortions, like I love the process, it gives me pleasure the same way getting a tattoo would, you wouldn't then say that I should moralize that.
Virtually no people would say that. What most women say when they support abortion is exactly what you just said, which is, well, I wouldn't do it, but I think it should be a right. And so now I think, okay, I'm glad you've said you wouldn't have an abortion and you've arrived at that through prejudice or however. I don't care how you arrive at it. But now I think at that point we have to apply reason to this, which is, okay, why do you find it repulsive? Well, because it's invasive. Well, because I don't like stirrups. Well, okay, fine, all those reasons. But at a certain point, especially, you really seem to care about living things because you don't want to eat animals either. Okay, I think there's a moral difference between a human being and a cow, but what you're recognizing is there's something monstrous. There's something morally significant
There's
about
not.
taking
That's
a
why I
life.
use the analogy again of you putting the cigar in the doll's mouth. It
Well,
also grows me
merely
out.
having a sex doll is morally significant. You know, I mean, I'm glad that she's just being used as my debate partner here to help me, so it's not 3-on-1. But you know, if one were to use this sex doll in the way for which it was built, that would be depraved and disgusting. And so, frankly, having her advertise my cigars is probably one of the most wholesome uses for the sex
Right.
doll.
So I personally wouldn't get a tattoo. I
Mayflower
find that
cigars, by
process
the way.
very repulsive, and the idea freaks me out. And I would pay to not get a tattoo. Does that mean I'm moralizing it? And I should be, you know, moralizing that proclivity towards not getting a tattoo and prescribe that other people don't do it.
Yeah.
Like, why are you assuming that I'm not getting an abortion for some moral reason?
No, I don't think you're doing it for a moral reason. I think you happily have arrived through your own natural tastes and preferences and prejudices at a correct moral conclusion. But the moral conclusion is, the reason abortion's wrong is because you're killing a baby.
You said it's a cow. Why is it different than a cow to you?
So come again?
Why is a human different than a cow?
Because human beings are rational
So
animals.
is a retarded person less of a person than a non-retarded person?
No, all people have defects. You know, none of us, even me, none of us is perfect. But the species of human beings, the thing that separates us from the animals is that we have will and intellect. This is why we don't.
But if you found out that like cows have it, or if you found a person, or if you have a person who, there's people who have really significant brain defects, etc.
Yeah, there are people who have all sorts of disabilities and defects.
Well, if we're
right?
just
That
going
doesn't
on
mean they're not human
rationality,
beings.
yeah,
Wait,
but that's the whole
something
thing.
quickly.
Right.
Do you believe in contraception?
I believe it exists, but I would strongly discourage it.
Even for married couples who want to like child plan?
Yeah, I think couples should be open to life.
Even though there's
I think married couples should be open to
even
life.
though there's like an overwhelming amount of data that suggests that contraception lowers like abortion rates, basically, right? If a person never gets pregnant.
I think people should have more babies, and once they conceive the babies, they should also not murder the babies. But I don't.
Wait, so you think
but-
married couples should just every time they have sex should get pregnant, or should be aiming towards getting pregnant?
You know,
open to
believe it or not, it usually doesn't work quite like that. But I think they should have more kids. Yeah, totally. And there are also, by the way, there are. Again, it's morally controversial, but there are modes of a more natural process that would be able to quite accurately time a woman's
Until we're
menstrual
at the
cycle.
point where we're getting rid of abortion, then are you then in favor of contraception?
No,
because
well,
you're saving lives?
I also reject the premise that you've just made, which is that contraception reduces abortion rates. I think, you know, there's a very easy way to cherry pick those data, because you can say, well, in this very small subset of data where we give condoms to college kids or whatever, they have lower abortion rates. But broadly speaking, over the past 60 years, we've had a proliferation of contraception, and we've had a proliferation of abortion. The rates have spiked, and they've lowered it sometimes, but they've remained fairly high. And the reason is more fundamental than statistics, which is that we have a mentality now that sex can come without consequences. And so condoms can be very effective, and whatever like women put inside themselves, and that can be very effective too. But sometimes it's not. And by accepting the mentality that sterile sex is a right, it then implies a right to kill the baby, so you don't actually have to face the consequences when it happens.
I think I pushed back on the idea that like people were not having sex prior to contraception, because
I never suggested that.
Okay, I thought it was suggested, because when you're saying like, oh no, abortion rates have gone up since contraception, I'm not sure if that's true.
They were having kids before contraception.
And they were also getting abortions before
No, I mean, you know, the other reason why it's, I think, silly to try to separate these two phenomena is they occurred basically at the same time. So you had legal abortion beginning in 1973 with Roe v. Wade, though it had been legalized in other states prior. This was, you know, the 1960s and 1970s, the sexual revolution, when contraception became much, much, much more popular and available, and abortion did at the same time too. So it's simply a fact. As contraception became more popular, the abortion rate went up. Now you might say, well, those are disconnected phenomena. Okay, maybe they are, but they certainly occurred at the same time.
At least to my understanding, and maybe we can even search this up right now, people did have abortions, or did have a high rate of abortion before even like Roe v. Wade. What would happen is that they were like more like back alley abortions, illegal abortions, such abortions that like basically put the mother's life in danger.
No, none of that's true. They were having abortions. It wasn't at a particularly high rate. The rate spiked after Roe v. Wade. And it is true sometimes women died from back alley abortions. There's a fake statistic that went around that was cooked up by the abortion industry, which said that thousands of women a year were dying of abortions just before Roe v. Wade. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was the head of NARAL, the Abortion Rights League, admitted they just made that statistic up out of thin air. And we can fact check it because we have the statistics from the CDC. So the year before Roe v. Wade made abortion legal nationally, do you know how many women died of back alley abortions?
I don't have a specific number from the top of my head.
39 is the number. And do you know how many women died of legal abortions? 24. And so almost the same, but you'd say, well, it's a little bit higher for the illegal abortions, except that if you look at the number of states that had legal abortion versus illegal abortion, if you control for that variability, it comes out to almost exactly the same number. And it was a very, very low number. So, you know, that wouldn't be a recommendation of legal abortion.
To my understanding right now, if we decide to like to take a state or a county where one county has a greater amount of contraceptive access, promotes it more, teaches kids about contraceptive use versus a county that there isn't that necessarily same level of sex education, the one that has the less amount of sex education, contraceptive access would have higher amounts of abortion. Do you dispute that?
The one that has higher, did you say the one that has higher rates of sex education would have higher rates of abortion?
No, the one that has higher rates of sex education and higher rates of like contraceptive use will have less abortions than the one where there is no sex ed. Basically, places that have less sex ed have higher abortions.
Well, it depends. It depends on if we're talking about a community that is strongly discourages contraception and premarital sex and abortion, that would be less likely. If we're talking about a community that has very low rates of religiosity and low rates of getting married, but also low rates of sex education, which is just kind of liberal sexual revolution teaching, then maybe you would have higher rates of abortion there. I don't dispute that at all. I mean, we live in a culture now that is broadly supportive of abortion and of contraception, including religious communities. But if you, to use my own group of religious people, if you look at Catholics compared to the rest of the country, and then if you look at traditional Catholics, guys who like the Latin Mass and smells and bells compared to regular Catholics, the rates of divorce plummet, the rates of abortion plummet, the rates of contraceptive use plummet, the rates of childbirth go through the roof. And so the reason I pick that group out more than the others is they seem to have all of the pieces that I'm talking about here, and whereas others, they might have one but not two, or they might have three, and so there it's much harder to compare.
What is a woman?
You're gonna hate me for this one, Michael.
Lay it on.
But before I have Michael respond to you, I want all of you to respond. Why don't we have Pixie go, then Farah, and then Jasmine. Go ahead.
A woman is a person who acts and is perceived as our societal perception of a woman.
That's at least half of it.
Farah?
I'd like to do more research on this topic before publicizing an opinion. Veto.
Are you joking? That's really your answer?
That is my answer as of now.
Hey,
come on,
so
Farah,
even if you're not going to reason about it, let's just talk from your own personal prejudices and stuff. Come on, just between us gals.
Just between us
gals. That's
we can talk after the show.
What?
But I like to thoroughly think
even
out
Shia LaBeouf wants you to.
I like to thoroughly think out my opinions before publicizing them and platforming them.
You don't have a hunch? I bet you have a hunch of what a woman is.
I didn't say I don't have a hunch, but that doesn't mean I want to platform my hunches.
Okay. It's too dangerous to venture an answer these days. Okay.
To give a hunch?
Yeah.
I would take kind of Pixie's view. I think women can be, I don't think trans women and biological women are the same, but I don't think trans women are men either. Like they're, you can have an umbrella term for women and have both trans women and biological women under it without realizing that, without also saying that they're exactly the same and they have all the same issues and everything's the same.
If they're neither men nor women, what are they?
They are women. I said that, but I would say they're a part of the umbrella of woman.
Okay, not a part of the umbrella of man.
They are because they're biological men.
So they're both.
You can be a trans man or a biological man, or you can be a trans woman and a biological woman. So depending on how you're looking at it, if you're looking at biology, they're not the same.
Can you though? Can your identity be different? Your metaphysical identity be different from
your biological identity can definitely be different than your social identity. Yeah.
How?
Easy. When this goes back to the whole chromosomes argument, but like you didn't check any of our chromosomes or biology before calling us a woman, right?
No, I think there are enough indicators.
But you base those indicators on like appearance. So obviously
all of my perception.
Yeah.
You look like women, you walk like women, you smell like women. I think you're women.
That's her point. It's a performance, and you're basing it off
the
of
secondary sex characteristics is what you're basing them on, and people can change their secondary sex.
Your bodies is what I'm basing it on.
Which you can change that.
But I'm not sure that you can actually, because I think what's here at the basis of it is a Gnostic idea that you can separate your soul and your body. And I know we don't like to use the word soul anymore, so we'll say your identity, man, or whatever, but that you can separate that from your body. And I just don't think you can. I think a woman is the sort of person who isn't a man. I think that's the basic definition of a woman.
What's a man then?
A man is the sort of person who isn't a woman.
How did you know we were women?
Because you look like women.
Okay.
And you sound like women, and when I talk to you, you give the impression that you're women.
So if a really good passing trans woman is here and you were mistaken,
then I would be mistaken, but he would not be a woman.
No, but my point is that
I can be mistaken on
what
rare
you're looking
occasion.
at is secondary sex characteristics, and those are things that people can
Those are
change.
the signs
so
that point to the reality
that,
of their sex.
This is all men and women, and like.
But I'm not saying the signs are synonymous with their sex. I'm saying the signs are signs, and the signs symbolize something.
But there is something to say about somebody that, like you said, walks, talks, looks like a woman, and to say that this is now 100% a man, you have to say.
No, he would be performing as a woman, and he might even fool me, depending on how much surgery he's had.
He would socially be a woman.
He would try to do that, but I don't think society should recognize those traits.
He would not just try. He would succeed
to the point where you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Usually you do realize is the thing. I know they convince themselves that they really but they, I've met plenty of transsexuals because they protest my speeches, and they usually you can tell because again it gets to what we're talking about at the very top of this debate, which was the question of human nature, right? I think me and old Uncle Aristotle believe that you're a body and a soul together. I'm not just my soul trapped in a useless body. I'm not just my body without a soul or totally separated from my soul. I think I'm a soul and a body together. So my body gives me much of my sex. To use the technical term, it's an inseparable accident of the individual. And I think that pertains to my whole person, because you can't separate those two, for the whole of my life.
If you change
Pixie,
your body.
can men get pregnant?
Can men get pregnant? Not biological men.
Okay.
Yeah, trans men can.
Okay.
Can we really divide men up like that? Like I'm a biological man, but I'm a spiritual woman, and I'm a...
I mean, we do, what is it? We do classifications within gender all the time. Black woman, white woman, for example.
That'd be racial.
Yeah,
not
but
gender,
that's still within the scope of women. You're still saying that, there's women who are black, there's women who are not black. There are women who have had SA experiences, there's women who haven't had experiences.
Race is real, though it's actually more difficult to pin down than sexual difference, but it's real. Yeah, there are different races, sure. So
Yeah.
you can, black people and white people are different races, and men and women are different sexes.
Last thing sorry. go ahead.
One can't become the other, except in the case of Michael Jackson, who he got the closest, but he was still, I think he was still a black guy.
Wasn't that vitiligo?
That's what he said.
Well, that's
what he said. I don't know if I believe Michael Jackson, because he was
actually, you I don't want to say stumbled because that's condescending, but whatever. You stumbled onto something quite interesting.
I'm glad I did.
Because the whole idea is that when it comes to like the notion of race, the reason why Michael Jackson was technically never white, he was always black, is because we treat race as like a historical question. Basically what we're asking when we ask somebody what's your race is basically what is your ancestry, like what got you here to be here now, versus sex or gender specifically, where we treat it more of a societal conception, like what are you performing as.
Yeah, I don't treat it that way at all, and I think that I think racial difference is real. The reason Michael Jackson's black is because he did Thriller. I don't think you can't really change your race. Rachel Dolezal tried, and she ruined her life because of it. But if you could, I'm kind of swarthy, right? Mm-hmm. You might think I'm like Arabic or Mexican or something, even though I'm Italian and waspy. I don't know, waspy, which you see in the Mayflower cigar, actually. But I certainly couldn't change my sex, because the difference between a black guy and a white guy, I'm not saying there are not differences, that there are physical differences, there are cultural differences, sure, maybe, but those differences are nothing compared to the difference between a man and a woman.
Okay, the point is, I think what we're trying to get at here is that when it comes to like our conception of sex versus gender, we base our conception of gender on how somebody
Dustin
looks.
Washburn donated
acts
$200.
more than anything else.
Michael, with your talk and logic about soul and body, do you believe it's possible for the wrong soul to be placed in the wrong body?
No, because I think, following old Uncle St. Thomas Aquinas, that the sex derives mostly from the body. So it would be incoherent to say that the soul is another sex. Because if the soul were a different sex, the soul being the substantial form of the body, it would mean that men and women are different species. And men and women have a lot of differences, but we're not.
Why did God create gender dysphoria?
Dustin, thank you. Last thing on this, and I think, Pixie, you've had, on your previous appearances, you've maybe had thoughts on this. And I think feminists tend to differ on this last topic that we're going to hit on when it comes to the trans discussion, sports. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there should be separation? What are your thoughts on, for example, trans women participating in women's sports?
Yeah, so I think what I've currently seen of the data and studies is that even after taking hormones and such, there might still be advantages in certain ways. So to me, it would be like, it's a theoretical question, like I would have to have more data, but basically if it seems that some of like these biological advantages are like too high or it cannot be mitigated enough through the use of hormones and such, then yeah, it would be too much of an unfair advantage versus if the data shows otherwise, and it's like, no, actually it is like mitigated well enough. So that's my general stance on it.
Isn't it that aren't we just all slaves to like the data? You know, it's like, well, if the study shows,
I love the data.
Yeah, maybe, but the data are so manipulated. I mean, social scientific data, they're in a major replication crisis.
Well, if
right?
it wasn't, the scientific method is our best way to get to the truth.
Is it? I'm not sure about that.
I would say so. So I think it's the best we have. Otherwise, we just have our anecdotes and our feelings.
No,
and our
but what? Look,
opinions.
I'm all for empirical scientific analyses of the things that it can measure, but those are all physical things, and what we're talking about here is deeper than a physical thing. Right, we're talking because we're not mere flesh. I don't think we think we're mere flesh.
Well, this is where we disagree because we think that
you think you're just flesh.
No. We disagree on whether like you're like, oh, the issue here isn't the data. The data on whether this would be unfair to women is what I care about.
Well,
because if it wasn't, then I would say yeah, they could do it.
The data on whether this is unfair to women are not going to come from some like dork economist. That those data are going to come from the reality of the different. It's going to come from natural scientists. Certainly, it's going to come from. People who have an understanding of what human nature is and what justice is.
No, I don't think this is a human nature debate. I think this is about, does your muscle mass give you an advantage? And if you take hormones, it seems to not, like you said, reverse all of the advantages that you had.
How does a scientific study conclude something about fairness or justice? How do you measure justice under a
it doesn't
microscope?
jump to that conclusion, but we use their conclusions to then make our opinions.
Oh, you're saying so you would look at a scientific survey and say, wow, that big husky dude who swam against the women, turns out he was a lot faster than all those little women, and therefore I conclude that men competing against women in a women's sport is unjust.
No, what you should do is you should be like, hey, okay, how do we realize if, like, okay, I don't know, should trans women compete with real women? I don't know, do they have an unfair advantage by doing so?
I love that you slipped there and you said real women.
Well, biological women. Okay.
I love it.
Biological.
No, you just accidentally said what we all know to be true.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, biological women, you could argue, are real women, but that doesn't mean trans women are not.
Which implies that the trans women are not really under the category.
They're not under the category of biological women. And
you just said they're not under the category of real women.
Okay, well, you can harp on that. My point here is that...
No, I think it's... I'm not trying to get you. I'm just trying to point out you
the point I'm trying to make is if I'm trying to figure out the answer to this question, and the question for me is not what is natural or what is Catholicism say, it's is this unfair to have trans women compete with real women? Well, I want to know, and the way to know that is to look at the science, not to just look at somebody.
How do you know what's fair and what's not fair?
In sports, to have an unfair advantage, and that you could
you would have to compare the
how do you know what is unfair?
You'd have to compare, like, right, like you would have to see, okay, if this is why they banned certain drugs. I don't know anything about sports. I'm assuming all this.
I'm just saying, how do you know what fairness is?
We all have. I would say that the only way you really know how fairness is that we all have kind of like a. We have a feeling about it. That's all I can say.
Is it a feeling or is it a reasonable conscience?
You can compare averages.
You can compare averages, yeah, but also the hunch, even the idea that we all want things to be fair is like an evolutionary, in my opinion, just thing that we all kind of seem to
Michael
have
Phelps
because it was
is a faster swimmer
advantageous.
Michael Phelps is a faster swimmer than some guy we've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Does he have an unfair advantage over the guy we never heard of? They have different average swimming times. Is the average swimming time going to imply something about fairness and justice? No, you need something else to come to a conclusion about justice and fairness, and that's not going to be scientific.
Well,
it's going to be philosophical and ultimately religious.
Yeah, I agree. Philosophical.
Quick. Last points. Go ahead, Pixie.
I'm gonna say I do think that comparing averages does give us greater insight what's like fairness or not. So, for example, Michael Phelps competing with other Olympic swimmers is much more fair than Michael Phelps competing against like a completely average swimmer. So obviously, there's something to be said about people within like the same leagues or performing around the same level, and that's why we have like golden versus bronze versus like silver categories.
Well, no, that would just be awards for the people
no,
within
but
the
I'm saying
category.
Sorry, I should have said Division 1, Division 2, Division 3.
Sure. So you're saying people who are of the same type, it would be fair for the people of the same type to compete against each other.
Yes.
But we've already established that trans women and real women are not of the same type, so they shouldn't compete against each other.
That's why
Forget about the averages.
That's why we're also saying that when it comes to like hormones or certain supplements, if the divide gets bridged enough, then it might open to new discussion or different discussion.
So
that's why we're
if you
saying
pump
it's
yourself full of
data-based.
enough hormones, then the trans woman who is not a real woman could become a real woman?
It's not about being a real woman, because as we said before, these are not just matters of the flesh, as you stated before. a lot of this is about societal perception of what a woman is, and that goes back to like certain actions and certain looks. So in our day-to-day life, that's what we rely the concept of woman on, actions and looks.
I just guess I wouldn't trust society more than I would trust objective truth. You know, I think that 50 million Frenchmen can be wrong. I think that actually the majority of people.
How do you think? What's the best way to arrive at objective truth?
I wish we could go there. Unfortunately, we are running. Have you go? I would like to hear a little bit more from Farah if you'd like to weigh in.
I was just going to ask, maybe I missed it. So what do you think the ideal form of marriage is? Like the woman goes to college and then she meets a guy in college and then she taps out of her career?
I don't know that going to college is really great for anybody these days. I'm pro-education, obviously. I mean, and I'm not even one of these conservatives who says, you know, you should all just study engineering or whatever. You know, I think that's bunk. I think you should read old books and acculturate yourself. But I don't think most colleges accomplish this these days, including the really fancy colleges, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. I don't know that maybe you can get an education there. I'm not totally convinced you can. And so, I get women should be educated. But, you know, frankly, these days, you send your kids to a homeschool co-op, they'll start learning Latin in the 3rd grade. You send your kids on the track to go to Yale or Harvard, and they're probably not going to know anything by the time they graduate. I would love my wife to be educated. My wife is extremely educated, and I would love my wife to be a wife and a mother. And I guess the image that I think of for marriage is not as, you know, the modern way of talking about it, where you say, this is my partner. It sounds like a gay accounting firm, you know. This is my total indistinguishable partner. No, I want a wife, man, you know, and I want a mother for my children. I want to be a father, and that involves different roles, and that involves complementarity.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So are you saying that like maybe they'll get educated outside of college, reading books or whatever, and then after that they should focus like at age 23, 24, getting married, and then not pursuing a career and focus on family life? Yeah,
I'm not going to prescribe exactly at what age people ought to get married. They certainly ought to get married younger. I wish I'd gotten married younger. But I don't.
But you would prescribe that they focus on a career with precedence.
Generally speaking, I think women will be less happy if they are going to the widget factory to work for Mr. McGillicuddy, so that they can make money that I will then receive from my wife to pay some other woman to raise our children. I think that's an extremely inefficient and disordered way to have a marriage, and I don't think it makes anybody particularly happy.
I guess it confuses me coming from a tradcon, because you guys believe in the design of a lot of things. You believe in like the design of sex and what's like the most optimal use of sex. Why did God give us sex? Yes, and you would say like the end of sex would be to pair bond and reproduce. So if women were not meant to pursue careers, why would God, according to your Christian purview, you're Christian, right?
Yeah.
Like equip us with so many rational faculties. Like why are women so good at like aerospace engineering, nanotech, pediatrics,
I don't know if I'd say they're so good at aerospace engineering.
Why are women
scoring higher than you guys in every subject?
Why is it that
they're not totally represented in these fields?
My question is, if tradcons use God as like their purview for, you know what I mean, use our faculties as the metric for what we should be pursuing,
about this.
Why is it that women are now outgraduating men like basically 2 to 1, but then you guys are prescribing?
Because the colleges are total nonsense now, and they have a bunch of fake majors, and it's a scam.
Is law a fake major? Because this is now we have more female first-year associates.
Right, and law school is largely a scam too, and you've got a glut of lawyers.
Well, my question is, why would God equip us with these things, these faculties, if God did not want us as women to pursue these faculties and instead abandon it at first step for marriage and kids?
The premise of your question is that raising children and running a family in the domestic economy is not a rational activity.
It's not that it's a rational activity, but why equip us to be so good at STEM and college and all these pursuits?
What could be more important than raising a family?
I'm saying why give women the ability to both have a child and still be able to read like intellectual texts or
to educate the child.
Look at aerospace engineer. Well, that's the thing. You can
to raise your kid to be an aerospace engineer. I guess,
but
if you're really
interested in that. But you can't be an aerospace engineer yourself.
Women can if they like. They generally don't do that.
No, I'm asking. So is that your position, that God equipped women to be as good at STEM, to outgraduate men, all to just pursue homeschooling for their children?
If you look at like Fields Medal recipients, Larry Summers got fired from Harvard for pointing this out, but this is the top prize in mathematics. Until about 10 years ago, no woman had ever won the prize, and now I think one woman has won it. And I'm not knocking, there are plenty of women who are much more intelligent than me. The reason Larry Summers, who's as far as social scientists goes, is a very respected one, and he's a big lib. But he pointed out that the reason why men tend to dominate in the highest intellectual fields is not because men are simply smarter than women, but because the bell curve of intelligence for men is wider than that of women. So,
but for a society, isn't it like societies that allow women to work, even us, if we hadn't had women, we brought in like trillions of dollars to the economy to take out half of the mines in the world. In the world,
yeah,
because
I think life
the
is
bell
about more
curve,
than money.
the top. I agree, but if you want a flourishing, wealthy society, you can't do that by eliminating women from the workforce.
I agree that we're wealthier today than we were 50 years ago. I'm not sure that we're flourishing more than we are. I mean, we're literally a dying society, right? We haven't had above replacement births since 1971.
Would you be okay with immigration as a way to?
That's why we have mass migration, but mass migration causes all sorts of social problems, which is why it's deeply unpopular.
Before we pivot, I do want to pin down your position on this. So yes, the bell curve is wider for men, but on average, the average women are smarter than the average men. Obviously, at the ends of the curves, there's more unintelligent men and more high intelligent.
The first thing you said that wouldn't imply the second, right?
It's not implied. That's just the fact. Is the bell curve is wider for men. Like there's more unintelligent men and more intelligent men.
Are you talking about the greater male variability hypothesis? Is that?
I'm saying there's on average women are more intelligent than men, but if you look at the most intelligent people, they're more likely to be men. If you look at the least intelligent people, they're less likely to be men. So I'm asking you from your Christian purview, because if you're a nihilist, you're atheist, you could just be like, oh, that's randomized, who cares? It doesn't necessarily mean it's best for society.
If you're a nihilist, you can't say anything at all, because nothing means anything.
Well, that was my point. If you're a nihilist, you could just say those curves should not be indication of how we should live society. But as a Christian, if you think sex is most optimized for certain purposes, you would probably think intelligence is best optimized for certain purposes. So why would God equip the average woman to be smarter than men? Do you think it's just for homeschooling their children?
Again, the claim that you made at first, which is that men and women have bell curves, the men's bell curve being wider than the woman's, would not imply that the average woman is smarter than the average man.
Oh, no.
It would line them up exactly.
The curve itself
right?
implies or actually indicates that
it would
on
just
average...
be the extremes.
No. If you actually look at the curves at the top, it's women. The women's curve is taller than the men's curve.
But the IQ of the curve would be on the x-axis, right? That's where you get the extremes. So I think.
So are you disputing that on average women are more intelligent than men?
As would Larry Summers, as would the people who have studied this. But again, I think it's secondary to the point. Your point is
my
the more
point
interesting
is,
point
why
of
would God equip us to
why would
be
God make
so
women
good at
smart?
school and STEM? If women on average were doing really, really poorly in STEM and all these, like if men were the one outgraduating us 2-1, then I can understand from a Christian purview saying like, see, God doesn't want you to be good at school because God wants you to focus on these more domestic pursuits. But how can you look at all this evidence and think that we're so specifically designed by God and then deny that?
I think you've bought the big lie of feminism that goes back to Mary Wollstonecraft, which is that men are endowed with greater virtue than women, and I think it's just bunk.
I'm saying the opposite.
You're saying what you're saying is that the most important things to do, the most impressive things to do, just the greatest stuff to do, is to do what most men do, which is go out and work some job.
No, I didn't even moralize. I didn't even say that STEM and aerospace and all these industries that women are good at are even morally good. I was just saying they happen to be good at these things. So from a Christian purview, you're the one who would ascribe morality to that.
You're saying it's better to do that, I think, because you're saying
from a Christian purview, because you think from a Christian purview, what you're good at is what you should do. So if women are better at childbearing, they should do that. If sex is best used in this specific use, then people should do that.
In that narrow reading, then I think it's pretty clear most women are better at raising children than building rocket ships. So I think probably most women would prefer that. But even more broadly, I think you're exalting male professions in a foolish way. I think that you're
I'm not even hyping them up. I'm just asking you.
I think you are hyping
from
them up.
Your theist purview, why would God make women so good at STEM and college and all these pursuits if God just wanted us to tap out as soon as we met a man and just focus on childbearing?
Look, women do fine on certain tests, but
we're doing great.
You're doing great.
On a lot of tests.
Sure.
Better than you.
Well, perhaps. I don't know.
No, I mean, the future...
I defer to your knowledge of your...
The future of academia is unequivocally female. Do you deny that?
I agree that the future of academia is bleak. And so if you think that it implies that women will dominate academia, then you said it, not me. But I don't think that the future of anything is female. I think the future of the human race will be the complementarity of the sexes and marriages and children, or there will be no future of the human race.
This is something I also wanted to point out to earlier. You're saying that people are having less children, that's a bad thing, but I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. And the reason why, at least from what we see when we compare better developed countries to less developed countries, is that people are choosing to have fewer children, but they're choosing to invest more in those fewer children. So back in agricultural times, people had to have a lot of children because they had to have those children work in the farm, basically take over chores, take over a bunch of stuff. So they would have 7 or 8 children, a lot of times malnourished, a lot of them died, versus now where it's like, okay, yeah, they might have 1 or 2 children, but those children are well fed, they're getting well educated,
they're getting all the best psychiatric
home.
drugs in the country.
Well, do you think that, okay, I guess here's the other problem. Earlier on, we were talking about like, hey, you know what, things are getting better measured now than before. That's why the whole thing about like, oh, people are less happy now is not necessarily true. Do you think that, let's say, middle of nowhere country in Africa or something, where they're malnourished, have a family of 7, do you think those people are happier because they can't report it? Or they're living technically more of a traditional lifestyle than like somebody in a Nordic country or European country?
Yeah, I think the word traditional is doing a lot of work there. I agree that, sub-Saharan Africa and Oklahoma are different, but I don't think it's a totally fair comparison. And I agree it's better to be nourished than to be malnourished. I agree with that as well. But I don't think that one necessarily needs 2 lawyer incomes and a Tesla and a big screen TV and 5 iPhones to be able to thrive and flourish. I think we've become far too materialistic, and we now know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So we've got more money than ever, but we're all miserable.
Wait, when you cited the data on the 2-parent households, but socioeconomic status and education, especially maternal education, are big predictors of childhood outcomes. So how come the data on two-parent households, we should follow that, but not the one on...
I'm fine with women being smart. I like when women are smart and well-educated, because they're raising my children, One is raising my children. I'm not... If I were living in Africa, maybe I'd have 5...
This is where you deviate from the red pill.
Right, true. But, it is said that the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. So when a man chooses a woman to be his wife and to raise his family, he is entrusting her with his life, so I don't think he wants her to be a dummy or to be vicious or to be anything like that. He would have no incentive to do so.
But it's better to have fewer kids that you can, it seems like, provide more for and make sure than to have 10 kids and none of those kids end up being or flourishing.
I think it's good to be open to life. I think that one of the big problems in our society is that we've embraced sterility. So we're sterile intellectually, artistically, philosophically, and literally. We don't have any kids, and we exalt as some kind of supposed political right sterile forms of sex. So I wouldn't recommend that at all. And I think when you get married, to my earlier point, you're giving yourself wholly over to another person. And so you shouldn't withhold anything. You should be totally open to life for the unity of the spouses.
Is that practical in modern society? I feel like you have a very idealistic view.
Oh, no, I think I can tell you from experience.
Well, you're
it's
very
totally
successful.
Practical.
You're very successful. You're not
kind.
Struggling to feed your kids.
I'm not. I haven't been totally canceled yet. That's true. But I know people who make less money than I do.
I have
a lot less money, and they've got a million kids, and they're very